this equation has no derivation, but it's a postulate. Again, what is a postulate? That from my logical deductions I am making that this is a postulate. Now we can prove that this postulate turns out to be correct. If it turns out to be correct, it will be widely accepted. Got it? So that is how. So what you are going to do in this topic is not child's play. It was like done over years and years that you will just be doing in about a class or two. Now here I repeat, right
But
from
before we begin, विजिट कीजिए iitwalebaba.com पे। यहाँ से आप फिजिक्स और मैथ्स के हैंड रिटन नोट परचेज कर सकते हैं अपने बोर्ड, जेई, बिटसेट या फिर किसी भी इंजीनियरिंग कॉम्पिटिटिव एग्जाम की प्रिपरेशन के लिए बहुत ही कम प्राइजेस में। डाउनलोड कीजिए IIT वाले बाबा ऐप फ्रॉम गूगल प्ले स्टोर और व्हाट्सएप ऑन अस 7974122749 फॉर मोर इन्फॉर्मेशन।
give this concept because no one was accepting. It was the first time accepted by Einstein in 1905 because Einstein gave his photoelectric effect. You remember photoelectric effect? Let me just talk about it from the top. What is photoelectric effect? It is when a light of a certain radiation falls on the metal surface, electrons are ejected from the metallic surface. Now this concept was already noticed before, but the observations could not be explained unless and until one takes care of the Planck's hypothesis. You getting the point? Planck gave his concept of quantization, but it was a sudden jump from macro to the microscopic world. That was not accepted. So till in 1905, Einstein explained the photoelectric effect using the Planck's hypothesis. You understand the historical developments? And then what happened in 1907, because the atomic model was also developing simultaneously. Dalton gave his model which failed at various steps. We'll look into the failures and the advantages. But then in 1907, Thomson gave his plum pudding model. So that was like a model which had no base at all. So that is why it was like rejected and not had many drawbacks. Then in 1911, Rutherford did his famous experiment with the alpha particles. And he gave the first nuclear model of the atom. He gave the first nuclear model. Why? Because his model had a nucleus in between and then it had the electrons revolving around it. Okay, so Rutherford actually stated that you have a nucleus which has the electrons revolving in specific orbits around. And then in 1913, Bohr actually refined the model and he gave the first quantum model. Quantum model of, because he talked about the theory of quantization in the atomic structure. And then things went on to develop. The dual nature was also given finally a call by de Broglie. De Broglie actually talked about the dual nature of light also, and de Broglie's principle was given in somewhere around 1923. Then in 1926, Schrödinger, 25 or 26, Schrödinger gave his quantum model of the atom, and that was like very widely accepted. Schrödinger gave his equation, that was the Schrödinger wave equation. We will talk about it. This equation will help you solve the structure of the say the atomic model that was in particular solved only for the hydrogen atom. And thereafter things were like eased out a bit because you got a perfect quantum model. And let me tell you, the Schrödinger wave equation that he gave, was also a postulate. This equation has no derivation, but it's a postulate. Again, what is a postulate? That from my logical deductions I am making that this is a postulate. Now we can prove that this postulate turns out to be correct. If it turns out to be correct, it will be widely accepted. Got it? So that is how. So what you're going to do in this topic is not child's play. It was like done over years and years that you will just be doing in about a class or two. Now here, I repeat, right from 200 and 300 BC, scientists were always interested. So what they did, they used to grind the elements in mortar and pestle, and the smallest, tiniest particle that they got, from that they concluded that there exists a small entity which cannot be divided further. This was the concept that was given initially. Then Dalton gave his atomic theory where he stated that your atoms are indivisible. He talked about the concept of atoms which are indivisible. And then thereafter there were developments like Newton gave his corpuscular theory of light. In 1870 Maxwell talked about the wave nature. Electromagnetic radiations were talked about at that point in time. And all this was related to your classical mechanics. And what is your classical mechanics? It is the science dealing with macroscopic objects. Okay, and then thereafter in 1900s suddenly a concept came, that was the concept of quantization. That is why Max Planck is also sometimes called the father of quantum mechanics. Why? Because all this that is based on quantum mechanics, you have classical on one side, and quantum mechanics is the study that deals with microscopic particles. So quantum mechanics is the study that deals with microscopic particles. So here, then came the concept of quantization by Planck, which was again not accepted till in 1905. Einstein explained the photoelectric effect. And what is the photoelectric effect? It is the ejection of electrons when a light of certain radiation, certain frequency falls on the metallic surface. This is like the explanation of photoelectric effect. Then in 1907, Thomson gave his plum pudding model, which was again not a successful model. In 1911, Rutherford talked about the nuclear model, wherein he performed his alpha ray scattering experiments that we will talk about. So in that he talked about a nuclear model. Now why a nuclear model? Because he talked of a separate subatomic particle which was a nucleus, and it had the electrons revolving around it. You had the nucleus in the middle and the electrons are revolving around it. So then Rutherford also could not explain certain things like the stability of atom, etc. In 1913, Bohr gave the first quantum model. Why? Because his studies were based on, it was like a combination of classical and the previous studies along with the touch of quantization. And finally in 1926, Schrodinger gave his Schrodinger wave equation. We'll just look into it from the top. And remember that there is no derivation of the Schrodinger wave equation. It is a postulate. Okay. And then thereafter, then there were like modification of just this equation to solve your systems further. Like for example, initially the interest was only in the most basic atom which is available, which is hydrogen atom. So now let's do it in detail. Just remember that this is how atomic structure developed, and now you have a knowledge of this branch which deals with macroscopic objects, that is called classical mechanics. It is basically based on the Newton's laws of motions. Okay, and then there is the quantum mechanics, which is the study of microscopic objects. Now let me just talk about another study. I talked about CM. What is CM? Study of macro. This is study of micro. Now you may be interested in studying the macroscopic objects from microscopic point of view, and that is called the study of macroscopic objects from microscopic point of view, and it is called statistical mechanics. It is called statistical mechanics. It is the study of macroscopic objects from microscopic point of view. Now going back to the Dalton's theory, let's just quickly check it up. Remember that Dalton talked about the atom to be, this is the first one that we're going to take up today. Dalton's atomic theory, which talked about the atom to be a hard dense body. It was like a hard dense body, and it is indivisible particle of matter. and it was considered to be indivisible. The second thing that you can actually note down is that each element has a particular kind of atoms. That means the atoms which are contained in a particular element will all be the same for a particular element, but as we move from one element to another element, we find that there will be a difference. So they had particular kind of atoms. Okay, it used the theory of law of chemical combination. He actually at that time used this, and it was actually believed that atoms are not just indivisible, they are also indestructible. They are also indestructible. These were like just the fine things that you had done before, so just note them in points. And then thereafter we had seen that it was not a very successful model because it could not give an explanation about the isotopes and isobars. Why atoms should differ in valency. So I'm just giving you by and large should differ in valency. So these were the two things which he couldn't answer. Remember that the basic gist of the Dalton's atomic theory was that he talked about the atom to be indivisible and indestructible. And then thereafter he stated that the elements have a particular kind of atoms, and he used the laws which were available at that time, like the law of chemical combination. Apart from it, when you actually do a model, you find out whether all the answers that you were looking for are answerable. I mean, whether it is answerable or not to all the questions which were like coming up. So it could not explain the concept of isotopes and isobar. I hope you remember what are isotopes. Same atomic number but different atomic masses. And what are isobars? Same atomic mass numbers. Alright, and here what we have is he also could not explain as to why atoms should differ in valency. Thereafter, it was actually an experiment that was done by William Crookes, a scientist with the name of Crookes. What he did was he talked about the cathode rays. I'm just telling you the main important things. Actually, how do you study about the cathode rays? He actually generated some kind of rays existing from an element, because atoms knowledge had already been imparted by Dalton. So scientists went on to now do experiments with the atoms which were available. Why different in properties? Because they will look for the answers. What were the questions? Isotopes, isobars could not be explained, and then he could also not explain why different valency. So why the behavior was different. So what he did was he took a gas discharge tube. Gas discharge tube is the one in which you have two electrodes set at a very high potential. So there some kind of rays were generated, and those rays were actually deflected by the positive part. So what they were attracted towards the positive part. So basically it was found that the rays which were generated from the elements at that time which were used for study were nothing but the cathode rays. Cathode rays are they're nothing but a beam of negatively charged particles, and those negatively charged particles were called electrons. Those negatively charged particles were called electrons, and this term electrons was given by a scientist called Stoney. The name electrons was given by a scientist called Stoney. And then J.J. Thomson also did his experiment from where he could actually find out the specific charge to mass ratio, that is the famous E by M ratio. The charges to mass ratio that he could find, and this ratio was equal to 1.758 into 10 to the power 11. What will be the units? Coulomb per kilograms. Charge is coulomb and mass is kilogram. So Thomson gave from his experiment the charges to mass ratio, and thereafter there was the Millikan's oil drop experiment that was done, and from the Millikan's oil drop experiment he actually could find out the charge on an electron, and that charge, all of you all know, was equal to 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19 coulombs, and the mass of an electron is 9.1 into 10 to the power minus 31 kilograms. See, there is no harm as you're writing, please try and memorize it right here, right now. These are some terms which will be used again and again, and you may or may not be given the values. So please take care of that. Then as these were the negative rays, then the positive rays were also discovered, and these positive rays were nothing but they contained a stream of positively charged particles, and these particles were called protons. Protons were discovered by Goldstein, and the mass of the proton was found to be equal to 1.6735 into 10 to the power minus 27 kilograms. Fine. And then after that, basically Thomson's model had come up. That's the simplest model that one talks about. So let's just talk about it. Thomson's model was nothing but it was a plum pudding model where it was believed that the positive charges are like distributed all over your atom, and you have the electrons which are embedded within it. Say like you have a positive charge which is like, if this is your atom, it was believed that the positive charge is spread throughout this atom, and somewhere in some spaces you have the electrons embedded. So it was called a plum and pudding model. That is why it was called a plum pudding model. This was the Thomson's model that was given. Clear? And please remember these things because they came up slowly, steadily, and the contributions from each and every scientist is important. First, Crookes actually studied the cathode rays, which were nothing but a beam of electrons, and that term was coined by Stoney, and the charge on an electron is 1.6 into 10 power minus 19 coulombs. Units are very important, and the mass is 9.1 into 10 to the power minus 31 kgs, and your charges to mass ratio is 1.758 into 10 to the power 11 coulomb per kilogram, right? And then you had the positive rays also being discovered, which was nothing but a beam of protons. Protons are the positively charged particles. So protons were discovered by Goldstein, and you had the mass of the proton as 1.6735 into 10 to the power minus 27 kilograms. And then you know about the Thomson's plum pudding model, which was nothing but in which it was like considered, because now positive rays were also found to be emitted from the elements, and negative was also emitted. So it was like quite not that easy, but then he must have researched upon it to state that you have an atom which has positive charge all throughout and negative charge which is like embedded. So it was like kind of a plum pudding model till you had the Rutherford's model which was given. So what did Rutherford do? Rutherford's model was actually just talking about, say, a beam of electrons. He actually generated alpha particles. You know that? He used a beam of alpha particles, and then they were like made by these alpha particles were made by thin metallic foils, and then they were made to bombard on a thin film of metal foil. It was made to fall on a thin metal foil which was around 10 to the power 4 atoms thick. You now know what do we mean by the number of atoms, which was about 10 to the power 4 atoms thick. So here in this case, what was actually were the findings of Rutherford? Let's talk about the observations. Okay, he generated alpha ray particles. So alpha rays, which comprised of the alpha particles. Remember that when I talk about a proton here, proton is generally your 1H1. You know that? Where this represents the atomic number and this represents the mass. And when I talk about the alpha particles, you should also know that I am talking about helium atom now. Here in this case, alpha particles are represented by 2He4. Okay? Alpha particles are represented by 2He4. So now the observations that Rutherford found when these particles were made to bombard on a thin metal foil were like most alpha particles just passed, simply passed, you will say undeflected. They simply passed in an undeflected manner, simply passed straight away. So what does this imply? This implies that because for every observation you need to have a reason. If I am putting the metal foil here and I am making the alpha particles fall on it, which are like positively charged particles in one sense, what was happening? They were just simply passing through. So this implies that majority part of my atom was empty. It was found at that time that majority of this space in atoms is found to be empty. Then it was found that some of them were deflected by small angles, some got deflected by small angles, and very few, very few in fact, got deflected by large angles, and some even to the extent of 180 degrees. So 180 degrees means that they're just retrieving their path back. If they're falling like this, then they will just go back through the same. So that means there is something which is in the middle of the atom which has the same charge almost as yours. So they would like charges repel each other, so they got completely deflected, and you had some so that means this sum and sum, what does it mean? That majority, most of them were undeflected, means majority of the space in the atoms is like empty, and you have some deflections by small angles and some by very few by a very large, means that you have a small concentration of some positive charge in your atom. Got it? You have a small concentration of the positive charge in your atom, and therefore the conclusions that he made were like, you can actually draw conclusions simultaneously. What were the conclusions? The first conclusion was that because they were like, you talk about the empty space, majority of the atom has empty space, then you have the alpha particles which are getting deflected, so that means there is some positively charged body inside. And if it is getting deflected by a very large angle, that would mean that there is some charge which is very high, which is sufficient enough to repel, because alpha particles are heavier. So some positive charge which is concentrated, which is very high charge, high positive charge, which is concentrated in a very small region, charge concentrated in a very small region, and that is known as that was called a nucleus. Okay, now here when we talk, so this was by and large your Rutherford's model revised. In Rutherford model, basically what was actually given, that there is a nucleus which has a thin population of electrons around it. Electrons were found to be moving around it. Now the problem with the Rutherford model was that he could not explain the most important thing, that was the stability of the atom. That means that if you have a nucleus in the middle and if you have the electrons revolving around that nucleus, then in that case you know that the electrons as they move around will tend to lose energy. And if the electrons tend to lose energy, then in that case what will happen? They will ultimately collapse to the nucleus. That means according to Rutherford, the model that he had proposed, he could not explain as to why the atom is like a stable entity. Atom is stable after all, nothing is getting destroyed around us on its own unless and until some force is provided to it. So he talked about the nucleus, there was electron around it, and he talks like, he actually talked about the thin population of electrons around it, but the problem was like he could not explain the stability. You understood why? Because the electron is expected to lose energy and ultimately fall to the nucleus, but that was not happening. And secondly, he could not even explain the spectra. He could not explain the spectra, means spectra which is giving rise to the colors and all. So basically, when we talk about the spectra, let me just explain when I say spectra, because one of the major drawbacks of these models was that they could not explain the spectra. And say if I am talking about different energy levels, please understand this concept. First of all, when I am talking about classical objects, then I know I am talking about continuous form of energy. Why continuous form of energy? Because in classical you have the energies levels so closely placed, the energy levels are so closely placed that you can have just a continuous way. Right? In this case, the energy levels are so closely spaced that you can just have a continuous way. Whereas in quantum, you have different energy levels. Now, when you talk about these energy levels, they are like you are talking about subatomic things. So here, the subatomic particle is an electron. So you have one level here and another level here. Understood? You have different levels, and what is occupying that energy? What is occupying that energy levels? Those microscopic particles only, microscopic entities that we are talking about, and one of them is an electron that we are talking about. So say an electron is sitting at this energy level. When this electron jumps to a higher energy level, please understand this because you're doing it for the first time. When this electron jumps to a higher energy level, it needs energy. So it will absorb certain amount of energy. I repeat it again. Say, when I talk about, say, what are these? These are the quantum levels, because I am talking about discrete energy levels. So if I am talking about, say, an electron is occupying this particular energy level. If it jumps from this level to this level, it will absorb energy. That will correspond to, if I draw a plot between intensity, you know, a graph can be plotted. Intensity means what is the intensity of radiation, how intense or how less intense. I mean, that's like kind of an intensity parameter. And here you have the energy. If I talk about the intensity versus energy, then in that case, that will correspond to some energy that it has absorbed. It will absorb some minimum amount of energy. That energy can be plotted, and this energy is going to give you information about the spectra. Say supposedly, if this energy corresponds to somewhere in the visible region is like a range of electromagnetic radiation. Just understand this. When it jumps from lower level to higher level, what happens? It absorbs energy, so it will correspond to absorption spectra. This you can understand. And now when it will jump back to the ground state, now it will emit energy, and this will correspond to your emission spectra. So basically you get information about the spectra in that fashion. So this is something which is known as a part of spectroscopy, because spectroscopy deals with the interaction of matter with electromagnetic radiation. There is another branch of science that we will talk about in a small fashion here, that is spectroscopy, and that is the branch of science that deals with the study of interaction of electromagnetic radiation with matter. Okay, now what was the last model that we did? That was the Rutherford's model, and after Rutherford's model we had basically talked about the spectroscopy that I just gave you, and that corresponds to, say, let's talk about the electromagnetic spectrum. This is an important thing that needs to be done. Electromagnetic wave or radiation, it is not a single wavelength, but it's a mixture of various wavelengths. But before that, you should understand what is a wavelength also. We talked about discrete packets. So I did tell you that Planck gave his quantization concept, and he stated that energy can exist only in discrete packets. This H is your Planck's constant. This H is your Planck's constant, the value for which is 6.626 into 10 to the power minus 34 joules second. And this is known as the frequency. This is known as the frequency. And remember that this nu is equal to C upon lambda. this nu, that is the frequency, is equal to c upon lambda. Again, you should be able to qualify each expression. What is your c? It is the speed of light, and what is that equal to? 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second, right? And this is your lambda, which is the wavelength. Also remember here at this point only that your 1 upon lambda is called the wave number. 1 upon lambda is given a term which is known as the wave number. That's represented by a nu bar. And the units of wave number will be meter inverse or centimeter inverse. What will be the unit of frequency? It is meter per second by hertz per meter or centimeter, or the general term is like per second. And then here you have, I've already given you. So please, this is like the simplest concept that you've done, and you can easily do that.